One is a brilliant take on the Metroidvania genre, taking inspiration from the God games themselves and actually pulling it off instead of feeling like a lackluster attempt. With a story that 100% didn't make me want to cry at all. And the other, a movement masterpiece with an art style to rival the best in the entire industry, with a story that 100% didn't make me want to cry at all. Shut the fuck up! Sorry. Welcome back to my rapidly deteriorating mind, that thing where we take two similar games and compare them based on categories important to their design, and at the end give each a percentage rating out of 100. Look, I even made a tier list breaking down the percentages and what they mean. Serves basically no purpose, but it's 2022 and people really fucking enjoy tier lists. The categories today are 1. Movement, 2. Combat, 3. Level design, and 4. Story. So without further ado, let's get into Game Wars 2. Hollow Knight versus Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Okay, first up we're talking movement. Now, based on what I said in the intro, the first category should be kinda obvious. Ori has the better movement system. That being said, Hollow Knight's a competent competitor in this category as well. Both games are responsive, fast, and fluid. The reason Ori takes this category is because of the way the devs approach the genre in each game. Team Cherry decided to focus on combat, building the game around challenging, dynamic bosses more than platforming. Moon Studios, on the other hand, especially with the first Ori game, focused much more on movement than combat, and they continued that trend just to less of an extent in Will of the Wisps. The result being an amazing movement system that stands as probably the best in the entire genre, but lackluster bosses that rely more on you mastering said movement system rather than dynamic combat. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though, because when I say lackluster, that's entirely subjective. Some players might enjoy the movement-centric fights that Ori provides more than the combat-focused ones in Hollow Knight. But now I'm drifting into combat territory, fuck's sakes, I am ADD. Okay, moves. When it comes to movement, Ori has more options than in Hollow Knight, allowing for more interesting ways to tackle the platforming challenges presented, as well as make them harder than in Hollow Knight, without being too much to ask for most players. In Hollow Knight, you virtually have 4 things that you can do in terms of movement. You can jump, double jump, dash, and super dash. That's it. In Ori, you can jump, double jump, dash, grapple, burrow, launch, flash, and bash, and all of them are used in unique ways to increase the variety and challenge of the platforming. Hollow Knight, on the other hand, uses platforming more as a background mechanic, instead using enemy placement and variety to steadily increase the challenge throughout the game. At least for the most part. There are a few sections when the platforming enters this sucks my ass territory. I'm looking at you, Path of Pain. So, it's pretty clear that Ori has the better movement system. The devs built the game around it, and it shows. The way Ori moves through the environment feels so seamless yet still challenging somehow that it picks up all the slack this game has in the next category when compared to Hollow Knight. If Ori's the master of movement in the Metroid genre, then Hollow Knight is definitely the master of combat. In fact, aside from Software games, there isn't a combat system in any genre I enjoy more than Hollow Knight's. The sheer variety of bosses and enemies allows for almost endless replayability. Not only that, but the boss quality is so high, it's almost comparable to this shit. I mean, you got Grimm, you got Three Sisters, Pier Vessel, Radiance, Asshole Radiance, False Knight, Broken Vessel, Umu is the stupidest shit ever, Traitor Lord, Hornet, Collector, Mantis Lords, and motherfucking Zote! And that's just off the top of my head. And on top of all of that, you have a well-fleshed-out talisman system that varies combat drastically. At a glance, Ori appears to have a lot of options for combat as well, but in reality, you probably won't ever use most of them. In fact, I think I played pretty much the entire game without ever switching off of the sword, bow, and heal combo. Ori also has a system similar to Hollow Knight's talismans, but again, only a few of them are actually useful. The secret to having a game's various mechanics not feel stale is to build certain challenges in the game around said mechanics to sort of nudge the player into trying everything the game has to offer. It's a fine line to walk, since if you pigeonhole the player into only being able to progress with one mechanic, it becomes even worse than having none of the mechanics feel unique. For example, let's look at Grimm. He's designed to have the player make use of the Shadow Dash to position during his Cloak Pillar attack, and to pogo swipe off of him to effectively deal with his dash. If you realize this when you're fighting him, the fight becomes way easier. That being said, you can fight him without these things and still win, it's just a lot harder. This is the game nudging the player into trying every mechanic it has to offer without forcing them to use something they don't want to. In Ori, on the other hand, the move variety feels like devs trying to answer Hollow Knight's success instead of continuing to focus on the thing that made Ori special, the movement. The result is a shallow combat experience that doesn't do enough to differentiate from start to finish. So, on one side, you have Hollow Knight, basically the Souls of Metroidvania. And on the other, Ori, which is kinda like the God of War of Metroidvania in terms of combat. In other words, Diet Dark Souls. Hollow Knight takes combat by a fucking baker's kilometer. Moving on to level design, this is a much more competitive category than either of the prior and will largely come down to what you enjoy about world design in general. Visually, Ori is the much more impressive game. I mean, they found a way to make a spider look pretty. Need I say more? Alright, fine. The color scheme is just so vibrant in Ori compared to the dull gray colors that Hollow Knight is plagued with. You can argue that with the atmosphere of the game and, the fact that this fucking masterpiece was literally made by 3 people, the color scheme makes sense. Which is true, but if we look at the visuals in isolation, it's not even a contest. On the other hand, the world of Hollow Knight is much more expansive and has better interconnectivity between zones. I would argue that Ori feels very linear for a Metroidvania, only having one path that you can really progress down at the start of the game, while Hollow Knight basically lets you have free reign right off the rip. Of course, you can't access certain areas right away because of the lack of movement upgrades, but it still provides more options out the gate than Ori. Hollow Knight also has a much bigger world, and I would argue more interesting overall with the NPCs and secrets that you can find strewn around it. Will of the Wisps again feels like it tries to answer Hollow Knight with the addition of more NPCs and a hub area for you to rebuild, but in my opinion, Hollow Knight did both much better. Fucking knockoff Cornifer, get the fuck out of here. So, we have another case of the games focusing their efforts on different things. Hollow Knight on structure, and Ori on visuals. And both games doing what they set out to do very well. So, for level design, it's going to come down to what you personally placed more emphasis on. Do you find graphics and atmosphere more important? Sony ponies? Or do you care more about the expansiveness and environmental storytelling? If you're the former, then Ori slaps the shit out of Hollow Knight. If you're the latter, then Hollow Knight spins Ori's block with the shooters on deck. I am so fucking white. Objectively, it's hard to say that either game's level design is better, considering they both did what they set out to do very well, but this is my video, so fuck objectivity, Hollow Knight wins. Okay, story. To bring back the God of War Dark Souls comparison, Ori has a much more classically told story in terms of how it's delivered, same as God of War. Hollow Knight chooses to tell its story in large part with the environment and things that inhabit said environment, more like the Souls series. Now I'm gonna be straight, I fucking hate exposition. I think it's lazy, unsatisfying, and all-around rhino dick quality storytelling, but luckily neither game falls into that trap too much. Ori a bit more than Hollow Knight, but Ori is far from the worst, and regardless, some people like that type of storytelling, so this will depend on both how you feel about exposition and what type of story connects with you more. I don't want to ruin the stories for anybody who hasn't played the games yet, but I will simply say that if you enjoy the Souls series, then play Hollow Knight. If you prefer happier stories, then play Ori. Hollow Knight is a story of sacrifice, corruption, and hardship. Ori, one of overcoming fear and saving a friend or two. And sacrifice, I guess, sort of. Both have their place and both have their audience. I personally prefer Hollow Knight's story, but Ori managed to take a type of storytelling that I'm not a huge fan of and make me still enjoy the hell out of it, and for that I gotta give the writers props. Will Smith is apparently in this game. I don't know, I think he's this guy because this guy fucks with rocks, but who knows. Anyways, Ori took a very cliche story trope, finding a lost loved one, and actually made it interesting, and the ending didn't make me cry. Shut the fuck up, steak, beer, more man things, monster trucks, I don't fucking know. Then there's Hollow Knight, which tells a story about a sort of manifest destiny that makes itself more apparent as the story progresses. Both stories were better than 90% of AAA games that release, so if you're a story buff in video games, you can't really go wrong with either. If you like a story to be told to you rather than piecing it together yourself, then Ori wins. If you like a mystery that you have to watch a fucking Mossbag video to understand, then you gotta give it to Hollow Knight. See what I did there? That was the classic watch a VOD video joke that every single Souls YouTuber in the fucking world has used at least once, but I dressed it up all fancy with Mossbag and Hollow Knight. You're welcome. Where the fuck was I? Oh yeah. From my perspective, Hollow Knight tells the more intelligent story, and Ori made me feel more complete upon finishing. I had no questions about what I had just experienced, while Hollow Knight I had to beat a few different times and in a few different ways to fully understand it. Some people will hate that, and some people will love it because it allows for more replayability. So for story, I gotta give a nod to both games. It's not the primary aspect of either, but both are more than passable. With all that being said, which game is the better game overall? Well, I gotta give it to Hollow Knight. In my opinion, it tells a more intelligent story, it's longer, it has better bosses, better level design, at least in terms of layout, and has some of the best DLC to release for any game in recent memory. Don't get me wrong, I fully recommend playing both, but if you only have the extra cash for one or the other, my opinion is that Hollow Knight will offer you the better experience for your money. I give Hollow Knight a From Software territory 98%, and Ori a very respectable 87%. Hollow Knight wins, fucking Silk Song's never coming out, bitch, video over.